Hi, everybody. I am not Victoria Alexander. I'm Christina Fallon. I'm filling in for Victoria this evening, but you also have Lisa Yanchi and Rashida Sadiq as advertised. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So you can ask questions in the chat and we will be answering them throughout and at the end. So please hold your spoken questions until the end, but you can feel free to fill up the chat. We will get to them as soon as we can. And also in the chat, we're going to be sharing relevant links as we go through the presentation. So keep a lookout for those. And when we're done with everything, you're going to be emailed a recording of this presentation. So if you have to duck out for a little bit and come back, don't worry about missing anything. And we will also be sending you our Buying into Brooklyn ebook. And you can share that with your friends and with anybody else who's buying. We really feel like this information should be free and available to people because a better educated market works better for everybody. So please share. And you can contact any of us afterwards with questions if you don't want to ask them publicly or if we don't get to them today. So, and then one quick thing before we get started is that at Realty Collective, we do run a women-owned business blog series. And if you know anybody with a women-owned business in New York City, please submit that to us and we can feature that in our blog series. But I want to get started fast today because we're going to lose Rashida at 5:45. So we definitely want to get through, and it's a crazy market right now. I know everybody's going to have a lot of questions, so we want to get moving. So quickly, I'm not Victoria Alexander. I am Tina Fallon. I have been with Victoria since almost the beginning of Realty Collective. I've worked with Victoria for 16 years. She began the boutique real estate firm 17 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate in New York City. And we are here to be your matchmakers, your therapist, your coach, whatever it takes to get you into your Brooklyn home. And one way we do that is to work with our dream team, so Lisa Yanchi and Rashida Sadiq. We're going to go first to Lisa, and then we'll go to Rashida.
Hey everyone, my name is Lisa. I am a loan officer at Cross Country Mortgage. Cross Country Mortgage is a private mortgage bank, which means we work just like the big banks, but all we do is mortgages. I'm licensed across the country and do deals, everywhere, but my specialty and about 90 to even 95% of my business is New York City and New York State and New Jersey and Connecticut, but mostly New York City. So I specialize with first-time home buyers. I love helping people buy their first home. It's a big deal. And me and my team are sort of here every step of the way. And I'm really excited to talk to you about what's going on with mortgages and how to help you get into your home.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rashida Sadiq. I am a real estate attorney. I have been practicing for 19 going on 20 years. I have a small firm located downtown Brooklyn is our main office, but I represent lots of first-time buyers in all of the boroughs, including New Jersey, also in Westchester, Long Island, and Suffolk County. As I always like to say, buying is kind of like a roller coaster. We're here to guide you along that process. I look forward to giving you the tips on what you should be looking for in an attorney, explaining the process of going into contract, and just making sure that you understand the process as you make this big decision on purchasing.
Great, and then that comes back to us. So Tina and Victoria, we're your real estate agents. So as buyers brokers, we are paid by the seller. So we are here performing a service that you don't actually even have to pay for. But what we do along the way is we act as your coach, your therapist, your sounding board to help you get through what Rashida described as that roller coaster of buying. It's our job to help you find your dream home and then match you with the professionals that you need to help you get your dream home, and then help you through every single confusing step of the way. And we love it. As Lisa was saying, I love working with first-time home buyers. I believe in home ownership as a path to generational wealth. And if everything that we can do to help people get on that path, especially for people who don't have like a leg up from family money, or, you know, they're going through this for the first time, we really love helping you access this asset. As challenging as it is, we think it's really worth it. So we always say you have to start with your team, and your team always includes a buyer's agent, somebody to represent you, because the sellers are represented by their own agents, an attorney, a New York City real estate attorney, not just any attorney, but somebody who's used to doing real estate in New York City, and also a mortgage professional. So having your own buyer's agent is great because our fiduciary responsibility is to you as the buyer. We owe no fiduciary responsibility to the seller. So it's our job to work for you, answer your questions, and look out for your interests. And the same is true for your broker and for your attorney as well. So we like to get started with that because before you're even really looking at property, it's important to interview people, find people you feel comfortable, you know, will advocate for you, people who you trust, and ask everybody you know, ask anybody who's been through this recently, get referrals, and really take the time to interview people, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with people like us. And if you don't like your team, if you don't trust your team, it's going to make the job of finding and buying real estate a lot, you know, less pleasant. So yeah, and then and one thing is, we have a note here that says about making sure you have people who have real estate experience in New York. Don't go with an online mortgage company that just wants to give you a rate and they're like based who knows even where, or your uncle, the attorney who works in Florida. You really need professionals who work in this specific market, because New York is weird, and we're all experts at this particular kind of weird. So why buy now? It's really exciting to see all of you on this call, because one of the things that we found is that as interest rates have ticked up, there's become a lot less, a lot of people have tapped the brakes on their purchasing process, and that's understandable. When I bought my first place, my initial interest rate was 8%. So I don't feel completely freaked out by the way interest rates are right now. And I also think that at this moment, particularly between now and the end of 2022, which I know is a really tight timeline, there is real flexibility in the market. So if you were buying at a time, if you're looking when there were like bidding wars and, you know, oh, every time you'd show up to an open house, there were 20 different people. We're not having that right now. And we're also not seeing a huge influx of inventory. So it's not as if prices are going to come down substantially, but what we're seeing right now is great negotiability for buyers. And so negotiate your purchase price now, and you can always refinance your loan later if interest rates come back down. I'm going to let Lisa touch on that too. So it's a great time. Rent is still outrageously expensive. You get to design your own home. It's a great long-term investment. So not necessarily a great short-term investment, but a great long-term investment, and a great way to build equity. And if you have the cash to make any kind of a down payment right now, again, Lisa will get that into you. If you've got 3%, if you've got 10%, if you have 20%, you're golden. You are not in a position right now where you're going to be outbid by cash buyers everywhere you go. It's a really good time to be a buyer who is financing a home. So yeah, but it's not always a great time to be a buyer. So we will include a link in the chat to the rent versus buy matrix. So it's New York City, 60+% of the people who live here rent their homes. There's no shame in renting. So sometimes it makes better sense for you to rent if you're planning on leaving the city in the next couple of years, if you're planning on starting a family, but you can only afford a studio apartment, things like that. Buying might not be right for you. So we always use this rent buy matrix as a way of helping people orient themselves. Buying isn't for everybody. Buying right now might not be for you. So we're not here to talk you into buying if it's the wrong choice for you. All right, so you're going to assemble your team. We mentioned the big three: your agent, your mortgage professional, and your attorney. If you're buying something where you are going to plan a renovation. It's also good to have a contractor, an architect. We recommend in every home purchase that you use an inspector, even in a co-op purchase where the building is responsible for the envelope. It's always great to have an inspector. It costs money, but an inspector is going to leave you with a kind of owner's manual for your home. When am I going to have to replace my dishwasher? How long is my hot water heater going to last? Things like that. It's really helpful. And sometimes an inspector will catch something that is a real deal breaker. It's worth it to spend $700 now to not have to spend, you know, $15,000 unexpected dollars 2 months from now. So we are going to move. You've got your team. You're ready to buy. You've done the matrix, and you know you're ready. So I am going to throw over to Lisa, because the most important thing, as I'm sure you guys mostly found out already, is securing your financing.
Great. So yeah, so one of the first things you want to do when you're thinking of buying is to talk to me or a mortgage professional about getting pre-approved. And why this is really important is because the pre-approval will give you an idea of how much of a mortgage you can get from the bank, which in essence helps you understand your buying power and what your maximum purchase price is. So getting pre-approved is actually a very personal process. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I'm going to talk to you about, you know, what your job employment is like. How do you get paid? Are you self-employed or are you W-2? If you're self-employed, you can 100% get a mortgage, but we're going to have to see your tax returns and we're going to have to talk about how we're going to make that work. I'm also going to talk to you about your debt. Do you have student loans? Do you have car loans? I will then, part of the pre-approval process is definitely to run your credit. And the reason why we need to run your credit is because that gives us a picture of the debt that is going to be a factor in getting you pre-approved. Running a credit for a mortgage is different than like opening up a new credit card. And it'll be run once, and then we won't run it again unless it expires and you find a house, and then we'll have a conversation about that. But it's important in order to know what your credit score is and what your debt is, because that's a very crucial factor to getting you pre-approved. The other thing we'll do is we'll talk about products. So one of the really cool things about me and our bank is we are a correspondent lender, which means unlike the big banks, we don't have, you know, 1 30-year, 1 15-year, and 1 7/1 ARM product. We actually have over 80 products. So I can really talk to you about what you're looking for and find the right product for you, rather than squeezing you into that 1 30-year product I have. One of the things important is we have a first-time homebuyers program for New York State, which allows you to put as little as 3% down. And you can also get down payment assistance up to $15,000 to help with down payment and closing costs. Now, there are income restrictions. So we would have a conversation to see if your income fit into the limits for this product, as well as you need to be a first-time home buyer and you have to move into the home. So that's just one example of the kind of products we have that could be very beneficial. We also, you know, FHA is a great option if you don't have 20% down and you're looking to buy a multi or single family home. With FHA, you can put as little as 3.5% down. It is typically not the best product for buying a condo, for example, but it can be a very good product for a single or multi-family occupancy. We also have, you know, maybe you do 10% down or 15% down or the standard 20% down. So there's a lot of options to sort of figuring out the right product for you. So let's talk about rate for a minute, because obviously that's something on everyone's mind. So rates are up. They've been going up for over a year. The rates of 2.5% to 3% for 2.5 to 3 years ago are gone. And you know, right now we're in a market where the rates are somewhere between 6s and 7s. What I will tell you, to echo what Tina said, is the rate you have now is not the rate you're going to have for 30 years. The rate you have right now is going to be the rate you have to buy this home. When the recession hits, which it will, rates are going to go down. And when that happens, you're going to refinance. So when we have a conversation, we'll talk about what that means in terms of, you know, what product fits best considering if or when you might refinance. I will also say about 70% of my business right now are people that looked over the last 3 years and couldn't get an accepted offer. Either got outbid by cash buyers, got outbid by people waiving mortgage contingency, which is sort of crazy. And, you know, we're just not able to get the house because so many people were looking. Now those people are not only getting into contract, but they're actually getting into contract at a price lower than the purchase price because of what's happening with the market. So, so that's sort of how you got to look at the situation right now. The last thing I'll say about why getting pre-approved is so important is, first of all, you don't want to look at things that are beyond your purchase price. I mean, that's just not fun. You really want to have an idea of what your purchase power is before you start looking, so you look at the right things. Secondly, even in this market, as things are getting slow, a lot of listing agents won't even show you the place without a pre-approval because they want to know that you're actually a serious buyer. You're not just sort of wasting their time looking at a property. Finally, the third reason why it's important to get pre-approved, and also for me to see the documents, which I will ask you to send me documents to confirm what we sort of talked about, is because even in this market, I get a phone call from the listing agent all the time saying, hey, I've got this pre-approval from Sally that Christina sent over. Talk to me about their file. How does it look? And for me to say, oh, you know what? I ran their credit. Their credit's awesome. This is what their income's like. This is how the deal works. A lot of times that gets the person the place, because no one wants a situation where they accept an offer and 3 weeks down the line, the deal goes to poop because the mortgage person didn't do an adequate job of making sure that the mortgage could work. So that's sort of my spiel of why pre-approval is so important. Once I give you that pre-approval, it is a working draft. So as you start to see things with Tina and Victoria, you will fine tune what you're looking for. Are you looking at a co-op or are you looking at a condo? Maybe we started with a purchase price of $700, but I said, you know what, there's room to go up here, and you fell in love with the place at $750. That's okay. We just have a talk about it before you put the offer in to make sure there are no problems. Back to you.
All right, I got to unmute. It's so true. All of what Lisa just said is true. So hopefully we can help you be also excited about going through this process, and instead of having it feel like, you know, it's a root canal every day. So one of the things that we have now there's a kind of an overview of different types of mortgages. That there's a link to that in the chat. And then one thing that I did want to make a point of, because we're getting towards the end of the year, if you're self-employed and you're considering a purchase next year, please talk to your mortgage broker or a mortgage broker about how to structure your income as you report it to the IRS.
Oh, Tina, thank you for reminding me. That is like so important. So if you're self-employed, 100%, you want to talk to me or another mortgage professional before you file your taxes, because the general rule when you're self-employed is the money you pay taxes on is the money that we can use to qualify. And there are ways, that's the general rule. There are ways to sort of tweak the numbers to help with your purchase power. But once you file your taxes, we can't do anything. So with my self-employed borrowers, what I always say is work on a draft, send it to me, and let me look at it before your accountant files, so that we can make sure we're on the same page, that the tax returns show the income we need for what you're looking for.
Yeah, Thanks, Lisa. So, all right. So you've found out what you can afford. You're ready to buy a home. And then it's time to work with your real estate agent to figure out what your buying strategy is going to be. So there's a number of questions that we ask at the beginning. So how long are you planning to live in the home? Are you planning to start a family in this home? Does school district matter to you? What's your commute going to be like? Like sometimes people will be chasing prices further and further out, like into the borough, and they get to the point where they have an hour-and-a-half commute. That's something that we really want people to take into consideration as they return to office or don't. And, you know, are you a park person? Do you want to be near Prospect Park? And if you want to be near Prospect Park, there's a lot of parts of Prospect Park that you can access not through Park Slope. So there's less expensive options if you go around the bend, for example. If you want to be on the waterfront, there's a version of that can happen in North Brooklyn. There's a version of that can happen in South Brooklyn, et cetera. So we go through that process. We make sure we understand what you want. And then we also go through what your timing is going to be. So it's never too soon to come to us as real estate agents. Some people really want you to be like ready to start, you know, making offers. We will do a slow burn. I have a client right now who I just got into a place. I've been working with her for 8 years. So if whatever the timing is right for you, come to us and we're ready to engage with you at whatever part in the process you are. And then we, you know, we'll work together to sort of tweak your schedule so that we have something that's going to work for you. And then also so that we understand what your budget is. We don't want to send you to places that you can't afford, because it does kind of reset your expectations in a way that can be hard to manage. It can be a little heartbreaking. We want to make it less heartbreaking. So we've established all that, and we begin your home search. So if you want to add to the chat, like, where do people look for homes? I'm just curious to hear what search engines people are using. If you go directly to the real estate brokers pages, or if you're searching on Zillow or on Trulia. One thing not everybody knows is that Zillow, Trulia, and StreetEasy are all owned by the same company. So a lot of information gets shared among those different platforms. I do like, and I used to love StreetEasy when it was an independent platform and really focused on the consumer. It is less that now that it is owned by Zillow. So, but it does include a lot of information there. And obviously there's places where we as brokers, we're constantly gleaning information from places that aren't necessarily on the market yet. Either other brokers are talking to us about it, things are coming up through our office, or we just happen to know that somebody is thinking about selling, but they're waiting for the right time. So, so it's always good to be in conversation with an agent. We can also do all of that searching for you. What we find is that most people like searching. So we do a lot of sharing back and forth of information. Oh, have you seen this? Oh, can we get into that? And then we also work hard to communicate with whatever style of communication you like. We have a project management platform that we use, but we also be like, if you like to text, we'll text. If you want to be on the phone, we'll be on the phone. If you want to email, we'll email. So make sure you're working with an agent whose communication style matches yours, because otherwise you can miss things. And even in a slow market like this, you don't want, you really want to be on top of things as they come on the market. So we're going to include a link to the types of housing you might see in New York. And we're going to go over to Rashida to discuss the different housing types. But really quickly, obviously neighborhood matters hugely. We think it's also exciting during this time to explore neighborhoods that maybe you weren't considering yet. Brooklyn is an amazing, huge borough. Or if you're looking at Manhattan or Queens, like, get out there and, you know, have breakfast in a neighborhood that's not your neighborhood. See if you can enjoy it and have a kind of a, you know, in-town travel and get to see some other neighborhoods that are out there. But if you're already committed to a neighborhood, we can also manage that search. And then there's obviously other amenities. Sometimes doorman building really matters to people. Sometimes people want more privacy than that. Sometimes, you know, you want to live in Williamsburg, but you can only afford a co-op, and the only kind of co-ops that you can find in Williamsburg are income restricted. We'll talk through all of those different those different scenarios with you. And then we always recommend that you make a list of your 5 deal breakers. Like, what are the things you absolutely must have? And then we'll try to limit that to 3 deal breakers, because finding a great place really does involve a lot of flexibility, a lot of imagination, and I think a lot of, appetite for adventure. See what else is out there. And that is actually going to maybe work for you. So let's say we've set up search for you. We have a whole internal search system that we plug all of your criteria into. You're getting notifications either daily or as they come on the market. However, you manage how often you want to be notified of new listings. You're communicating with us back and forth. And one of the things that you're considering is, do I want to buy a house? Do I want to buy a single family house, a multifamily house, a condo, or a co-op? And I'd love to throw that over to Rashida to take us through a few of those different types.
So yeah, Sita had mentioned, there's various types of property that you're looking to purchase. Typically, a lot of time first time purchasers are looking at co-ops or condos. But of course, there's definitely single family houses, 2-family houses, multifamily. For condos, the reason a lot of time you're looking at co-ops is because of the closing costs, especially as a first-time buyer. In New York, a co-op is not considered real property, so you don't have things like mortgage tax, you don't have title insurance, which New York is one of the only states that have a significant part of your closing costs is what we call as a mortgage tax, especially when you're taking out a mortgage. That can be a big percentage of your closing costs, anywhere between 1.8% to 1.9%. So really about 2% of your closing costs alone is just for mortgage tax. If you're looking at a condo or a house, versus if you're looking at a co-op, you don't have that. You do have to go through board approval. So there is that, give or take for a co-op. Your time periods to close is a little bit longer than if you're buying a condo or a house. But once again, the major significant decision when you're looking at a co-op versus a condo or a house, a lot of times it comes, obviously, what's my closing costs are going to be, especially as you start, you have to come up with your down payment, you have to have money in reserves, depending on what you want to do. Co-op, you get shares, you get a stock certificate and a proprietary lease. So it's actually owning shares in a corporation. For a condo and a house, you actually get a deed. So it's considered real property. Prior to going into contract for a co-op or a condo, your attorney has to do due diligence, because even though you love the physical building, the unit, you want to know what type of community, what type of, enterprise, corporation, association that you're buying into, because you're sharing all of the expenses with all these different individuals, and they're also paying maintenance and common charges. So you want to make sure that, financially you're buying into a building of that sort. So that's part of that due diligence portion, which we'll talk, I guess, in the next slide when to go into kind of like your offer. But that's just a quick kind of summary of co-op, condos, house, are the main 3 kind of properties that a person is looking for. And then, of course, you have multifamily and commercial properties as well.
Thanks, Rashida. So, and then obviously we can get into all of that much more in depth. I know it's a lot to process. So some people may know all about it already, but for some people, we're happy to go through it in greater detail. So, so we're finding your dream home. So we're just going to fast forward through your search. So you've seen a bunch of different things. Maybe you've made a couple of offers, maybe some of them were a little bit tentative, and now you're really ready to negotiate a deal. You found a place where you want to live. And so we're just going to talk through in New York State, how it goes when you want to make an offer on a place. So first of all, and Rashida can get you into this a little bit more, an offer is not legally binding in New York. There's pros and cons to that. The pro is that if you want to walk away prior to signing your contract and submitting your down payment or your deposit, you can, but it also means that your seller can jump to another buyer as well. So the period of time between, it's really good to know what you're getting into when you're making an offer and to be ready to commit the time that it takes to get to a signed contract. So there's often a lot of back and forth in terms of like you make a lower offer, they counter your offer, we go back and forth a little bit until we have agreed upon terms. And then once we have the agreed upon terms, we submit a deal sheet to your attorney, and your attorney begins the next step of that process.
So yeah, so as Tina has said, put it in the offer is great. Both parties have agreed upon the basic terms. However, in New York, until the contract is actually signed by both you, the purchaser, and also the seller, and your initial deposit, which is called the down payment on signing, is actually received by the seller's attorney, either party can back away from the transaction. I've been practicing for many years, and I've had situations where I've sent out my client as a purchaser has sent out the contract and given the deposit. And then I had one situation, she found out she was pregnant that same night and called Rashida and was like, we can't look, a one bedroom is not going to be sufficient anymore. So can, stop it. Don't, tell them that we're withdrawing our offer. And that's perfectly was fine because once again, the seller had not signed the contract yet. And unfortunately, as the seller, you can submit your contract, submit your deposit, and until the seller signs it, the seller can back away. But both parties try to get things done as quickly as possible, as thoroughly as possibly, so you can get to that in contract, as we call it, next step of the transaction. But prior to that, getting in contract, there's a couple of things that happen. If you're buying a co-op or a condo, or even a house, one thing you want to do is your inspection. In New York, you do your inspection prior to signing the contract. If something comes up to inspection, let's say there's, windows that are broken, or the electrical isn't working, or there's a leak, these things now can be renegotiated or negotiated. Credits can be negotiated, repairs can be negotiated, and all of that now becomes part of the contract, which both the realtors and your attorney are working together to make sure that anything that once you do your inspection is incorporated into that finalized contract when the parties are ready to sign. You also, part of if you're looking at a co-op or a condo, is due diligence. So your attorney is looking into the financials, as I had mentioned in the beginning, for the co-op and the condo, looking into the history of common charge increases, assessments. Coming towards the end of the year, a lot of buildings are now doing the budgets for next year. They're thinking about, increasing the common charges or your maintenance. So your attorney is doing that due diligence. So hopefully they may not know 100% what's going to happen in the future, but based on the prior history of the building, they can say, hey, they've had assessments for the last 5 years. They've had common charge increases for the last 5 years. Potentially next year, they're going to have one. And this is the history of what that looks like. So that's part of what that due diligence is. So you want to make sure that your attorney, and that takes typically about a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the building and how quickly your attorney gets information. And all of these things happen prior to you signing the contract. If things come up in the due diligence, once again, your offer, your terms can be negotiated. If there's going to be an assessment that begins next year, that's going to be $20,000. That's something that you didn't budget for when you saw that the common charges or the maintenance was a certain amount. So now your attorney and the realtor can go back and say, hey, can the seller pay the assessment in full? Can you get a reduction in the price? Those are the type of things that are negotiated prior to you going into contract and part of that due diligence period. Things that also go into getting into contract. What are your contingencies? Mortgage contingency, a big one Lisa had mentioned there. You've been pre-approved. Now you want to, what happens when you put in your deposit? If you're not able to get your mortgage, you have a right to cancel the contract and get the return of your deposit. So a big deal is making sure that you have that contingency in there regarding your mortgage. Appraisal. As Lisa had mentioned as well, at one point people were, no, we're not, putting in appraisal contingencies or waiving that. But especially now, I've had actually in the last 2 weeks, about two other deals that had appraisals that came in lower, and we're renegotiating the contract to match the appraisal because we had in there an appraisal contingency, which are some of the terms that you put into the contract as you get into that phase of getting into contract before you sign. So that's part of getting you into contract, is negotiating those terms and making sure that they're in the contract that you sign when you're giving your initial down payment. Just a couple of things, like, so we have getting you into contract as well. Timing, especially now with, rates and end of the year holidays. For a co-op and a co-op, typically your closing time period is roughly 60 to 90 days. Because for a co-op, you have to have your mortgage first, which is typically about 30 to 45 days, then submitting your application to the board, waiting for them to review it, waiting for an interview, after that approval, and then scheduling the closing. So that alone can take 60 days just before you're going into getting before the board, and then waiting for that board interview. So if you're locking in your rate or you're thinking about closing for a co-op, you're in the back of your head, 60 to 90 days. If you're looking at a condo or a house, it can be 60 days because you don't have to deal with that third party of the board approval. But you still have to, if you're getting a mortgage, 30 to 45 days to get your mortgage, bank clearance, scheduling the closing. So once again, you're looking at a 60-day time period. So when you're locking in your rate, and I stress it because this has been a big thing, especially as Lisa had mentioned with the rates going up. When you're locking in your rate, have a conversation with the attorney, with your realtor, with your loan officer on realistically, what am I looking for? What happens if I don't close by the time the rate lock expires? Because these can, there's monetary inclinations, and a lot of time, if it's within that 30 to 60 days, the seller is like, hey, we're not ready to close. You haven't been approved. The co-op is like, what do you mean we have to close before a rate? We haven't even looked at your application yet. We don't care that you locked in your rate for, 30 days or 60 days. Our timeline is 2 weeks after you get your application for us to review it, then another week for interviews, and then we have a 2 week after that for you to get scheduled for closing. We don't care about rates. So always have to have that conversation regarding your timelines and having a specific understanding when you're going into contract, what your timelines look like.
Yeah, that is so important. And I think a lot of what everybody in your team is here to do is kind of manage expectations as you go, and also really get as much clarity from the other side, from the sell side of the deal, as we possibly can as we go through. Even as we do that, we will find ourselves in situations where it's a new construction condo, they're waiting for the Department of Buildings to approve something. There's some, they didn't get their TCO in time, and that time pushes. And really who ends up paying the price is the buyer. So unless you're lucky and rates have come down and somehow you were allowed to reduce your rate, then that's really great. But if rates are going up, it's very hard for us as your team to hold anybody else accountable for that. So we really want to make sure that we have a plan for what happens if it doesn't go according to plan.
So yeah, now let me jump in because I think
it's your turn, because now you're in contract. So
Rashida, I want to just echo that everything that Tina and Rashida has said, I'm going to talk about a little bit right now, but it's also why it is so crucial to work with a team that works well together and constantly communicates, because this is all about communication. And so I get the contract, right? We have a live deal. That means it's signed by buyer and seller, which means we're ready to go. Rashida has already done a whole lot of legwork with the due diligence. And when we have deals together, she calls me all the time and is like, hey, Lisa, on the due diligence, I saw this with the co-op. Is that going to be a problem? And 9 times out of 10, it's not. But knowing about it early, where I can only know from the attorney, is really, really crucial to helping everything be smooth. Because I request docs from the co-op, for example, but it's going to take 3 weeks to a month and a half for me to get them. But Rashida gets to see a lot of the stuff that is important to a mortgage in part of the due diligence. So that's just one example of why working with people who work well together, who work consistently with each other, who keep each other accountable, is at the end of the day so important for you and for this process. So I get a contract. It's not a surprise because we've been in discussion the whole time. So I'm aware that you found a place, that you have an accepted offer. I've gotten the deal sheet from Tina or Victoria. I've worked to get everything ready. So as soon as the contracts come in, we have what's called a live deal, which means I order the appraisal, which means I get any updated documents from you. And then also we talk about locking in the rate. And right now, this is a really important conversation because of what is going on in the market, right? So like Rashida mentioned, the rate lock is a time clock. Once you lock that rate, you have to close before it expires, or you have to pay extension costs. And they can get really expensive really fast. So, I have potential buyers coming to me all the time saying like, can I lock in when I am just looking? And I say, no, because we don't even know what you're going to buy. You might buy a condo, you might buy a single family, you might buy a co-op. That's totally going to change the rate and the structure of the deal. I also, last week I had someone saying, I have an accepted offer. Can I lock the deal? And I said, well, I want you to understand what you're doing. If you lock in before we have a fully executed contract, which conservatively is a week and a half to 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks off of your lock. That is basically dead time. So that means if you locked for 60 days, we have to take 14 days off right away, right? Which means now we're in a situation where we're, at 45 days. That if that's a co-op, that's a problem. That's a really big problem. So what I always tell people is I will lock you whenever you want me to, but you need to understand the implications of what you're doing. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is when having a good relationship with the realtor and mortgage person is so important, is what's going on with the seller? Is the seller buying a co-op? That's something we want to know, because the seller might be going through board approval, which means the seller's not going to close until they get board approval on their co-op. That's probably going to delay your closing. And we want to know about that as soon as possible. Or is it a vacant property? In which case the seller's like, dude, I'm ready to close whenever we can get this closed. That's great to know as well. So it really is a discussion on a case-by-case basis. I personally have a deal that I locked last week. I locked it for 30 days, which is very tight. It's probably going to take 45 to close. But because of the loan amount, a 2-week extension was actually a better deal than a 45-day lock. And so we talked about it. And the borrower said, you know what? I'm going to go with the 30 days. And I just understand that if I have to pay a 14-day lock, I have to pay a 14-day lock. But it's a better deal for me. That is totally great. But it's really about knowing what you're doing and being educated properly so you can make the right decision for you. So we do all that, we're on the same page, we get everything done, and then we get the appraisal order, we get you initial disclosures to e-sign, and then we are getting you through underwriting. And this is when my team really shines. And I really suggest you look me up on Yelp or Zillow or Google, and you'll hear reviews about just how fast me and my team are. And they're fast because I do a lot of the work up front to make sure we have a beautiful full file, so that when my processor Danielle reviews it, what she is doing is thinking about what the underwriter is going to ask for and making sure we have that in the file. Our underwriters review deals in roughly 24 to 48 hours. That's compared to 1 to 3 weeks at the big banks. So we go really quickly through the process. At the end of the day, that is in your benefit, because first of all, you want the approval from the underwriter, otherwise called the mortgage commitment letter. You want that before the deadline set in the contract that Rashida has drafted. And then the second thing is that you want to You know, if you're buying a co-op will not even schedule the interview until they have that commitment letter. So the faster you get through underwriting on the bank's end, the faster that you can get a board interview with the co-op. Some co-ops say, hey, come in tomorrow. Some co-ops say the next time we have an interview is 2 months from now. And you have no negotiating power there. You really got to go by what the co-op says. So after we do that, we get you the approval letter, and Tina can talk about the co-op package real quick, but I know Rashida has to go. So Rashida, if you want to like chime in, say goodbye, say any other last things before you have to leave.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. I actually have to run to another event. I have to get to by 6:45 and with some travel time. So I apologize for leaving early, but just as a wrap up, they're going to talk a little bit about the application process, and then get into your closing and scheduling the closing, which your attorney does, and just also making sure that the contingencies, when you have a co-op, you have the co-op approval process and you have the mortgage. So those are two contingencies that are definitely in your contract when you're purchasing a co-op. So if you're not approved by the co-op board, you have a right to get the return of your deposit. And if you're not able to get your mortgage within the time period, you have a right to cancel the contract, get the return of deposit, and also part of your mortgage, that appraisal is in there as well. So if there's issues with the appraisal, that also can be a negotiating part of once you're in contract, because most contracts will have that it is contingent on you getting a satisfactory appraisal as well. So those are your main contingencies in your contract. So when you're speaking with your attorney, you want to understand what your rights are, because you are putting down that 5%, 3.5%, 5%, or 10%, which is your deposit. Scheduling the closing, I'm sure they're going to talk about that and can throw in what I normally say about being the juggling, getting everyone to the closing table. And but ultimately now closes are in person. Signing the contracts, typically now you can do electronically, give your down payment via wire, but your closings are done in person. You're signing your documents for about an hour and a half with your attorney, understanding all of the documents that your loan officer already, commitment and the terms and things like that. If you have any questions that come up, definitely feel free. They're going to share my information. Shoot me an email. I am definitely available to respond via email or hop on a phone call. And just thank you guys again. Sorry I have to run, but continue on with the seminar.
Of course. So good to see you, Rashida. So, right, we'll try to sort of channel Rashida as we get through those parts of the process that are under the purview of your attorney. So, but here we are. So we're in contract. Lisa and her team are just crushing it on the mortgage side. And if you're doing a co-op purchase, there's a board package, as we've been describing. And oftentimes with a condo, there's also an application. In fact, I just did a condo deal recently where it was almost as involved as a co-op board package. They have more flexible ownership guidelines in a condo, but sometimes there is a pretty extensive application as well. Again, those are things that we should know for you prior to your signing a contract. And if it's a priority for you to keep like low paperwork, you don't really have the time, you don't want to engage about that, that's something that's really good for your team to know up front, so that we can only get you into situations that you're going to be able to handle administratively. One of the things that's good about this time in the world is that so much of what you used to have to assemble as hard copies, you can now assemble using either Board Packager, which is an online format where we can upload things directly there, or working with Farah in our office, we will upload everything to a secure spot in the cloud. Secure, like as secure as we can make it in the cloud, that where we will keep your information safe. We will redact all of your social security numbers, except for the last 4 digits. We will redact all of your account numbers. But so that's something I think we've become much better about. As things have moved online, we can make this process faster and easier. And we can also work to make it safer for you from a privacy standpoint. So, but it's a lot of information. Sometimes you've got to get reference letters from people. You have to reach out to your landlord to get a letter from them saying that you've paid your rent on time. It is a pain. We cannot sugarcoat it. It is not fun, but we try to make it as easy as possible for you so that we can get through it quickly again, so that you can close your deal in time before your rate lock expires. So yeah, so all of that is happening. And then you've gone through the process. If you do have a board interview, you've aced it because we've coached you and it's easy. And it's really not that hard. By the time you get to the board interview, it's actually, I think people used to dread it. Honestly, like nowadays, it's the easiest part. They usually happen over Zoom. It's not that bad. We've got thumbs up from everybody, from the board, from the bank. We are ready to go. Your attorney will schedule that closing. It's an in-person closing for buyers. Every once in a while, you can do it via power of attorney, but especially for first-time home buyers, it's really important to be there and understand what it is that you are signing. So, so being present at your own closing, I think, is important. So there'll be a closer from the bank. There'll be a closer from the title company. There's a lot of people that you get coordinated. They show up. And before that happens, usually within 24 hours of your closing, we will do a final walkthrough. So your agent will book that, and we will go through the property once the seller has moved out or the tenant who was there has moved out, and we check to make sure that everything is in working order and that everything is as promised and described in the contract. So, and if there are any discrepancies, we want to make sure we have enough time for the attorneys to address them. And again, as Rashida was saying, sometimes that's a credit, like, oh, in the time between when you came to see it and now the dishwasher broke. Okay, well, what does a new dishwasher cost? What does it cost to have it installed? What is the total fee of that? And also the sort of pain in the butt fee that we want to add on to that. So it's can we get a $1,500 credit at closing, for example? So there's little things like that to get negotiated at the end to make sure that everything is as you expected it to be. And then you're at the closing, you get your keys, you sign all your documents. Lisa gets you all the money. Sends the
Two things I want to mention that are really important. So in between when you get the mortgage commitment and then you get the clear to close. The clear to close from the bank is when we say, dude, we're ready, just schedule it and we're ready to go. Usually the conditions between the commitment and clear to close are very minimal, like insurance or an updated statement or what have you. But that's what me and my team will walk you through and help you with. Until you have a clear to close, the attorneys will not schedule the closing. So it's really important to know that that clear to close is what you want to hear so that we can get the closing scheduled. The closing is a bit of a dance because as Tina said, there are a lot of people at the table. If it's a co-op, there's a co-op attorney as well. And they all have different schedules that they need to do. So I will say Rashida and her team are pretty amazing at working within, the rate lock is expiring at X. We need to try to do the closing before then. But that's something you need to know. The other thing that's uber important is do not schedule your moving out date before you have a scheduled date to close. It is incredibly important because first of all, that's just adding so much stress to yourself that you don't really need right now. Second of all, everyone tries to fit in a schedule for closing, but I have movers coming on Tuesday, so I need to close on Monday is not going to be a reason why people cancel other closings to make your closing happen. So that's just something you really need to know, that everyone's anxious to get into their new place and to not have a coverage of rent and mortgage or happening, but it's something you probably need to factor. When I personally moved from a rental to a home, I just was like, we're going to have a month's rent that we pay, and we actually were able to just do a half a month's rent because our landlord was very nice. But we just had that in the equation of part of our closing costs because we knew, the issues with closing. So that's just something you need to keep in mind as you think, down the line about getting into contract and when you're actually going to move.
That's a really helpful reminder. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different fees that can creep up on you. So there's application fees, there's all kinds of fees in a co-op. The closing costs are lower, but there's also, a move-in fee, a move-out fee. There's a lot of different things that can and that'll show up as you go through that process, and you will feel like everybody is just basically bleeding you dry. So we try to make sure that you know what you're getting into ahead of time. And it's one of the things that Rashida will go through with you is what your estimated closing costs are going to be. And then as soon as we see what the board application is, we can go through and identify what the fees are. So we usually will be able to see the board application prior to your signing a contract. And if it's something where you feel like, you know what, I'm just not going to have enough money left to close after I've paid all of these fees to make this application, those are things that we will take into consideration before we move forward into a contract. So I think we did that a little bit faster than we usually do, although we're still almost at 6 o'clock. So if people want to chime in with any questions that you want to ask live, now would be the time. You can also put questions into the chat if you like. And also, of course, reach out to us afterwards with any questions that you might not want to share with the group. And if nobody wants to chat now, that's also fine. We can just give you an extra 4 minutes to your day.
And maybe go to the next slide with our contact info so they can see.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, look at that. I think our contact information will also be in the links that we have sent you. And of course, will be in our Buying into Brooklyn, book. So, all right. It looks like we don't have any live questions, which is fine. Happy to talk privately with you later or whenever you feel ready to start the process. So thanks so much for spending your evening with us here. And do get in touch if you have, if you're ready to get started. I am a big fan. I just want to say, whoever you're working with, for buyers, the period of time between Thanksgiving and New Year's is a great time to get a deal year after year after year after year, because sellers do not want to be holding that property into the new year. And real estate is, it's a financial decision. It's a very big emotional decision. And a lot of people just want to get done, and they see that, they see 2023 coming and they just want to know what that's going to be for them. So it's a really good time to be, and also nobody's looking. Like if you're out there, you're the only game in town. So it's a great time to be a buyer if you can get pre-approved now and get out there and look for something that you can afford. It's always, I'm a big fan of this time of year. All right, that's my last pitch for you can't, market timing is not real, but emotional reality is real. So people just want to sell. So, okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. And if you have any questions, do be in touch.
Thank you guys so much. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Okay. Nice to see you, Lisa. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. And thanks, Farah.